Welcome everybody to Brand Sweat and Tears podcast. I'm the host, Dave Oldham, and I'm really excited about my guest today, Eric Lowe, who is the founder of Credo. And Credo, well, I should let you tell the story, but I'm excited about this super cool, innovative product. I was just telling Eric earlier, my wife and I are very experienced plant killers. Not intentionally, but we just suck at keeping plants alive. Therefore, we're not much in the way of gardeners. We don't really have too many houseplants. If we did, I think the only ones we've successfully kept alive are plastic plants. So this is exciting. I think this will be a kind of a product that we could use that would make our lives better. And help us become better and understand plants better, maybe even like micro gardeners or mini gardeners or something. So with that, I want to turn the time over to you to explain Credo, introduce yourself, maybe give us a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into kind of this whole journey that you've been on to bring this really cool product to life.
Yeah, so Credo is at the core a plant data company, but we created a consumer product to help solve two big problems. The first problem is, there's a lot of plant killers out there, so don't feel alone. And so it's really helping teach people, right, because a lot of information you find online is either generic or anecdotal, and it really isn't designed, right? Like water is a variable, your location is a variable. There's so many different variables, and these instructions don't accommodate any of that. And so we built tech to help you understand exactly what your plant's needs are. But Leaflet is more than just a plant care app or even a plant care sensor. It's a plant care system. So it entails, right, the app, the sensor, and then we have this other side where it's we call it need-based product delivery. So we'll actually send you what your plants need when they need it. So fertilizer, pesticide wipes, new soil, and that's...
So the app is called Leaflet. The device is called Leaflet.
Yeah,
so this kind of system is called Leaflet.
Yes,
it's all under that
exactly.
brand name.
Yeah, so you have a Leaflet app, a Leaflet sensor, and Leaflet products.
Did you bring a sensor with you? Do you have one with you?
Oh, I should have.
I should have asked you to bring one.
A good idea.
Cool. Yeah. Anyway, so what I've seen pictures of it is it's like almost looks like a plant thermometer, right?
Yeah.
It's got a kind of a cool design with like a leaf sort of.
Yep.
Does it light up or something?
It does, yeah. So inside it has so we spent a lot of time focusing on sustainability and really bringing in technologies that have been promised for a long time, but no one's really pushed the industries to actually do it. So for example, like our sensors, they're very organic looking, and the reason they can be organic looking is they're all 3D printed. And so they're not injection molded, and they're 3D printed with plant-based bioresins, and so they're all very exactly and compostable. But the biggest thing is really the supply chain, right? We reduce a lot of carbon emission when you don't have to manufacture millions of units and then ship that millions of units across the ocean, and now it's print on demand. So we literally can have printers in our 3PLs at our we can have them anywhere, like in your home. You could print them, right? Like anybody can print these, and so that just offsets a lot of supply chain because now it's localized and it's only on demand, and it's also with recyclable plastic.
Okay, wait, I'm super curious about this. Let's say I have a 3D printer. I don't, but let's say I did. My dad does. He could print his own Leaflet sensor.
You can print the enclosures for it.
The enclosure.
And so,
and
so
you
say,
send me the little,
or say like you had a unit and your dog chewed it up. You can have us send you a new one, or you're like, hey, I have a 3D printer, and they'll be like, oh, you can just 3D print this on your own, and we'll show you how to like replace, the
and then
repair.
there's like a smart chip or something that goes inside the sensor.
Correct.
And you stick this thermometer in the soil, and then it reads everything about the soil, the environment.
So it's essentially measuring your plant's overall health, right? So we're taking into account, so you're on the app, we have an AI, so when you take a picture, it automatically identifies the plant species. And then from there, it takes your geolocation account. And so now it knows where you are in the world, the type of plant you have. And then now it loads to the sensor the baseline settings that it thinks that you should start with.
Okay, I've got a tomato plant. I live in Utah.
Yep.
Boom, I get there, right?
Yeah, not only in Utah, where specifically in Utah, right? So you're like in Pleasant Grove in Utah. So we know like, okay, the type of soil here is this, and this is like the water retention, all this, right? So that all goes into our algorithms, and it dials all that in. And it's always constantly learning, right? So if your neighbor also has a tomato plant, but they are just better at taking care of plants than you are, that's fine because you're going to learn from them without even having to ask them, right? So our system will pick up like, hey, this one person or these couple of individuals are doing really, really well in this area, and they're doing something a little bit different than our system thought they should be doing. Everyone's sensors now gets updated with these new.
That's awesome. I hadn't thought of that. So
Mm-hmm.
there's this kind of anonymized data sharing with everyone, as long as everyone has one of these, or the more people, I guess I should say, that have these, especially in a specific geographic area, the smarter the system gets.
Correct.
Therefore, the better we get at taking care of these plants.
Yep, and that solves now a core problem, right, of community gardens, right? Is co-op gardens or even urban farms on math, on paper, it's great. But what doesn't take into account is it requires someone with a lot of expertise to maintain and run, right? And so now imagine, you have the same knowledge and resources as that individual at your fingertips.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to spend the time to learn. You're actively learning in real time, and they didn't have to spend the time to, go over like, oh, what did you do wrong? Like, I don't really know. Like, I do it this way, and I'm not sure how you did it, but don't do it that way anymore. Like, do it this way. And it's always like, as a scientist, it's these little minute details that you really never think about as being really important or critical, and it turns to like be the most important factor of a failed or successful experiment, right? And so when I was in a lab, a lot of my experiments would work, and a lot of people come to me like, what are you doing differently? And then I would look over their protocol, and I'd be like, oh, I'm kind of a little lazy, so I let this one sit for like 2 minutes longer, and you did exactly what it said to do. So I guess extend it by 2 minutes, see if that works. And then they do it, and they're like, oh, it works. And I'm like, okay, cool.
So that's awesome. So I want to, you've got the leaflet system, there's the sensor, then an app. And then you also said that you're like going to send me like what, nutrients and like little packets or something. And what do? I just sprinkle it in the soil.
Correct,
essentially,
yeah.
And then you'll tell me this is how much water. The one thing that you mentioned earlier that I think is cool about this is your purpose in doing this, instead of making, for instance, a smart pot or a smart container that just delivered all this stuff like automagically, is you're trying to educate me.
Correct.
You're trying to teach me. So you don't want to do everything for me. You're just trying to create this virtuous cycle, this feedback loop to help me gradually become smarter and smarter and smarter. And you mentioned like ultimately like train everyone to become plant scientists, right? But in a way that there's not much friction, right? Like right now I could probably spend some time on YouTube and learn about Utah soils and even in my area and learn about tomato plants, and I could do that, but really I'm probably not gonna invest all that time. But almost everyone could say, hey, I'm going to buy this sensor, stick it in this plant, and it's just kind of going to gradually coach me as we go to get better and better and better at taking care of these plants. And so I sort of become a plant expert without having to like, oh, I'm going to make this my new hobby or whatever.
Yep.
Right? Like I don't have to like devote a ton of time and attention to it.
Or money or school. Exactly. Yeah. And that's the other side of what we're really trying to build is, so it turns out the world doesn't know that much about plants, right? So if you look through our databases, a lot of the plant growth data is null. It's not available, right? And so then you will ask, why is that? And then you follow the money, and it's very clear, right? Is $63 billion a year spent on biotech research, $1 billion spent on plant research, and that $1 billion that is spent on plant research is only spent on cash crops, right? So corn and soy, and that's incentivized, right, for other reasons. But other than that, you look through, if that's all ag tech's focused on, then the last resource we have is academia, and they have no money, right? They get no money. And if you look at the departments, there are no horticulture departments anymore. There are no botany departments. They've all been merged into either ecology or biology. And then the grants and availability to even research this is very low. So then when you actually look at where plant science is, it's about a decade behind everything else, right? They are really, really far behind. And it makes sense, right? If there's no money, then no one's going to be able to research this. And so no discoveries or innovation is going to happen. But this is a very, very big problem for all of us because plants is the solution to a lot of the issues that we're facing with the climate that's coming up on our way, right? Everything from carbon mitigation to urban heat relief to water retention to air pollution, all of those can be solved with plants. What we don't understand right now is how to leverage them in a better way. So, right, like look at solar roofs. They're actually pretty dumb, in my opinion, right? They deteriorate. They're very expensive, and they use very hard to get resources, right? Raw metals. And so you're telling me that we spend a lot of time getting these hard resources to make this solar panel that in less than 10, 15 years will just deteriorate, and I can't recycle this or reuse this in any way, so it just ends up in a landfill. That seems like the most inefficient thing that we could have ever created, right?
But we've like convinced ourselves like, oh, solar, this is a great thing. It's a really good investment. We should do this, right?
It is. But imagine now if we spent that time saying, yes, solar is a great thing, but could we use plants to create that power instead? And the answer is yes, we can. But now if more money and research went into that, now imagine if your roof was a plant roof. What did it just solve? It solved a couple problems. One, a plant roof can regenerate, so it can heal itself. So if you have wind damage, hail damage, soil damage, it doesn't care. It's a plant. It'll recover, right? It'll grow new leaves. Two, it is probably has a soil type base, and so now it can hold and retain water. Three, you're adding more plant material into the world. So now imagine if every single roof of every home was a plant roof. All of a sudden, right, carbon, they suck out carbon. So that's now being solved. They're now generating power for your homes. Awesome. They're holding more water in. But the biggest thing is they're also helping with urban heat relief because they're absorbing all the heat and not reflecting it like concrete and tile and all the other, like, right, all solar panels and all of that. So all of a sudden, it's like, oh, this one shift in how we approach it solved 4 of our big problems. And the way we were going to approach solving those was just creating more things that creates even more problems. And we just are on this loop of keeping ourselves busy forever.
That's so crazy. I hadn't thought of plants as an energy source. I mean, you know, I think it's pretty common knowledge, or at least I've been exposed to it a lot of, you know, it's carbon offset. That's really great. It cleans up the atmosphere. That's really great. And then there's the benefits of, you know, food and you know, materials for clothing or whatever, right? So there's all these things, but I hadn't really thought of plants as a substitute for like a solar panel, right? To capture and distribute energy. How close to reality do you think that is, and how efficient are plants compared to like a solar panel? You know, we're talking about like if I had the same square footage of plants versus the same square footage of solar panels, how far away are we away, or does it exist now? Like, how far do you think we're away from that being like we can capture the equivalent, you know, energy from plants as from like solar panels, for instance?
We are really far away, right? And that's because no money's going into this.
The grants, like you said,
right?
We're not funding the research.
We're not funding companies. We're not funding anyone to explore this, right? There is evidence that, plants can do it. We know that, right? Yes, a photovoltaic cell can do higher efficiencies right now, but that's saying that we're going to use the plants that we have available right now, right? There's nothing stopping me from modifying that plant to be able to match that type of level of energy generation, leveraging the biology that already exists.
Right.
And so, it's totally doable. And actually, that's where I want more people to be visionaries in, is thinking of, right? Like if you actually look and evaluate all the human-made products compared to biological equivalents, we're not doing very well. Right. So, and we have this hubris, we have this ego that we think that we can do better than nature. And then when the reality is like, we're really bad at it. Right. So if you think about storing data as an example I love to give, we store it on magnets, we store it on chips, we store it on whatever, right? That takes up a lot of space. And if you look at backing up the entire world's amount of data currently, it takes up an entire state to store that data. Entire state. That's how much area we need just to store the world's amount of data. When if we stored it on DNA, something that's in our blood, something that's in any biological living thing, I can hold that at my fingertips. That's insane. So I just took an entire state and I could fit it at my fingertips. That's how far away our technology is from the biological equivalent, right? And that's just one example of many. And so it's this idea of we shouldn't be using technology to replace anything. We should be using it to augment or accentuate what currently exists and leveraging what already exists in our favor, right? But in order to do that, you have to understand what exists better. or you can't tap into its already natural superpowers, right? So for me, when we talk about carbon mitigation and sucking out more carbon, it's like, well, trees already do that. So why don't we just supercharge trees to do it more, right? Like, why are we trying to create a machine that does it when we know like that's going to create more CO2 just to make the machine?
Yeah.
And it reuses raw materials, and so you look at the supply chain, you're like, this doesn't add up at all. I don't care if it sucks.
Eventually, it's a big pile of trash.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have to store it somewhere, right? So that's another thing people don't think about. It's like, okay, you suck out carbon. Now what? Now you got to store it somewhere. So then people are like, we'll make a underground facility and we'll bury all this. And it's like, roots just do that, right? Like roots just do that naturally, or the tree stores it itself. And then when the tree dies and decomposes, there's a whole ecosystem that makes sure that the CO2 stays underground, right?
Yeah.
And doesn't need us to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's just, that mentality. And so, that's the solar punk future. And so I want more and more people to start envisioning what that future looks like, right? How does technology work in harmony in our favor? And it's not really designed to replace us or to replace any living thing that's currently out there.
Yeah. Talk about your background a little bit, and then let's get into the whole, like, why did you do Credo? And that'll lead us into this cyberpunk versus solar punk, which are I've heard the cyberpunk term before, but the solar punk term is kind of new to me, so I'm super excited to get into that more.
Awesome. Yeah. So my background is I still am a molecular microbiologist. So I spent a decade at the U in the pathology department studying iron metabolism. And then I switched over to biotech, where I developed diagnostic tests. So a lot of the COVID type tests, PCR based, those were my field that was developing that, right? And then I ended up getting a master's in computer science because I saw the need to merge science and tech, right? Like I'm saying, you use tech to help you do your work better and faster, right?
Yeah.
You don't do it to replace anyone, because that's not what tech can do, really. Like, so anyone who's afraid of AI, it's like, that's not really what AI is going to do. If you're worried about that, then you're thinking about it wrong. It's like, AI is here to help you do the things that you're like, man, this takes up a lot of time, a lot of my brain space. Can you just do this perfectly? And AI is like, yeah, sure. Like, I'll do the boring stuff. And it's like, thank you. Like, I'll do all the creative, more bigger problems that I need to focus my time and energy on. So then Credo started. So Credo actually had a pretty long, unique journey, right? And this is actually how any business starts: is you have an idea, and the idea had nothing to do with plants. It was actually blockchain and electronic health records.
Wow.
That was the first idea.
Okay.
Nowhere near plants, right? But this is 2018. Bitcoin blockchain was becoming a hot topic, so I studied it, and I thought, like, oh man, electronic health records is so broken, right? Like the amount of time it takes to just transfer from the University of Utah to the pediatric one takes days.
Yeah.
And you're like, why does this take days to move a file from one spot to another, right? And it's because it's not well tracked and kept and everything. So anyway, but it turned out we did a lot of research, and it turned out it had nothing to do with technology. It had to do more with agreements and just bigger entities that don't want to. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then we found out the big giants, right? Bezos, Buffett, Amazon, Google, Apple have all attempted this and failed. And so it's like,
because of the politics.
Yeah, if you have billions of dollars in network way bigger than mine and you can't solve this problem, this is not a problem for me to be attempting at.
Yeah.
So then we explored every blockchain concept, right? We looked at title insurance, automotive industry, rehabilitation, insurance, and everything. And then it really just came finally to the end of, I didn't think blockchain's tech was quite ready to solve a lot of these problems, and that decentralized isn't the best solution for every type of problem, right? No matter how hot this tech is. And what I really noticed was we were using this buzzy tech to infiltrate into industries to now have the potential to disrupt within, but most likely the solution isn't going to be built
in a lot
blockchain.
Of cases. Those were like, here's a new hammer called blockchain. Now I'm looking for a nail to pound, right? And so they're trying to figure out ways, rather than saying like, hey, here's a problem I've got. Ooh, blockchain would be a really good solution for that.
Correct.
Right.
So the best tool for it.
How that's like evolved a little bit.
Yeah. So then finally at the end, in parallel to this, I was getting into plants as a hobby, and I was struggling, right? And I was humbled because my background, right? I've taken care of things as small as macrophages, white blood cells, all the way up to mice, all to rabbits, like everything in between I kept alive. And not only did I keep alive, I was genetically messing with them and keeping them alive.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had all these indoor houseplants. I'm like, what is up with you? Like, you are like easy. You should be basic. You just need water and light. Like, what are you freaking out about? And so, right, so then I started learning. I did the research. I started watching YouTube videos. I started reading articles. And my plants didn't respond all the same to any of the advice that I was getting. And I was like, something's off.
What's different about my plant than this plant?
Yeah, and I'm
thought it
doing
was the same.
Yeah, and then I would measure everything, right? Like I would measure the pH levels, I would measure runoff, I'd measure TDS. I even brought out like the way I would do it in the lab, and I brought out my logbook and I tracked everything. And at the end of the day, I was like, I can't make sense of any of this data because the approach we're going about is actually completely wrong. Because the way I'm doing it right now is very reactive. So I wait until the plant gets sick.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm now like measuring all this.
Mm-hmm.
And that data doesn't tell me anything because what caused it to get sick happened maybe 2-3 weeks ago. And I wasn't paying attention then. I thought everything was great. And so that event happened and I have no access into like what was that event. And so now when I'm trying to troubleshoot, I actually don't know what the best course of action is, right? Is this a fertilizer deficiency? Is this a lighting issue? Is this a watering issue, right? And then when you read like a yellow leaf, they're like, it could be any of those. And I'm like, cool, that's very helpful.
Or all of them in
Yeah,
combination.
exactly. And you're like, okay, so you get one shot, right?
Yeah.
You get one shot to try and figure out what is the true cause. And if you get it wrong, then the plant's gone, right? And that's where most plant killers experience this high death rate. And so for me, I was like, I need a sensor that can get me that historical data. And so I built the sensor because nothing existed on the market. And so, yeah, usually, first thing, if I could buy it, I buy it. But I did buy all the ones that existed, and they didn't work, right? They weren't very accurate. They weren't very precise. I'm sure a lot of the listeners here have experienced those type of products, everything from the analog meters that can say they measured 6 different things in one, all the way to some of the smart sensors. But, when you test it, you can literally just do it at home, take that same sensor, put it into 6 different spots of your pot. If you get 6 different readings, not a good sensor, right? So that was a big problem. So I designed my own. And the reason why was Precision Ag has this type of sensor, but is incredibly expensive, and you can't just buy it. You have to go through a whole sales process, and then finally they give you a quote, and they're like, yeah, $600 each.
Yeah.
And then it's just the sensor with a wire. So I'm like, oh, I have to like build a device that can then like connect to that, and then build another device, and then that can stream all the data. And then it's like, that point, it's like, I just might as well make my own. Like, this is crazy. So we did that. And then, so it's after like all this brainstorming of blockchain that another co-founder, he just barely put in a new lawn, spent $30K, and it was dying. And he's like, what the heck? Like, how come irrigation systems are so square? Like, my lawn isn't square. Like, well, this is dumb. And then he's like, how do these landscapers not know how to like set this up correctly yet? And I was like, because they don't know anything about plants.
Yeah.
And so the first idea of Credo then was like, oh, like I can actually make a smart irrigation system where we put these sensors in. They can tell then exactly which irrigation head to turn on and off. And so it's no longer the zone.
Head by head.
Yeah, no longer the zone concept.
I need that so bad.
So we did market research, and this is now 2019, and no one wanted this product. So they're like, I'm not going to rip up my whole lawn. Like, this sounds like really expensive. And I was like, yeah, there's a lot of parts to it. But you're going to want it because it's going to save a lot of water, and that's coming down your path.
But so you tried that, smart sprinkler systems, and it's like, oh, maybe the market's not perfectly ready for that yet.
Yeah, so this is part of what building a business really entails, right, is this upfront work.
Yeah.
And this is my advice to anybody who's thinking about becoming an entrepreneur or building a business, is this is actually the cheapest part to validate your business idea, right? And I know a lot of people are afraid about talking about their idea, but it's like the more you talk about it, the more you get feedback, and then you understand, like, are people willing to pay for this? If so, how much?
Yeah.
How big of a problem is this? And if the feedback is, I'd rather let my lawn die than drop $2K on a sprinkler system, then it's like, okay, then that's probably the reality, and we probably shouldn't go down this road, right?
Yeah.
But that is, like, to me, almost the funnest part of building a business, because that can be done for $100, $1,000 or less, guaranteed, right? $1,000 or less, you can validate a business idea that you had in a dream or with your buddies, and within that amount and some 3 months of time, maybe even less, you'll know like this is viable or not. And that to me is like so awesome. There's no like the risk is so low, right?
Yeah.
And to me, it's like the better you develop that, the better you will be at building businesses because you'll start knowing what to measure.
I love that, but I want to play devil's advocate for a second. So I want to push back. It's like I would have guessed that you would have to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to try and build sensors for a sprinkler system to get to the point to validate like how it worked or not. So how did you specifically like validate that, and like how does that fit into like the sub $1,000 kind of investment? When you think about physical products, you're like, oh, there's got to be money. It takes money to like prototype, to build this or whatever. So how did you do it?
So that's what I'm saying. You don't build anything,
Okay.
right? You do not build anything until the market says like, oh, I would love that, and
So
I want
with
that to
Credo
exist.
at that point, you did. It wasn't like you were building these sensors. You just started having lots of conversations with landscaping companies, with consumers. Like,
Yep.
how are you validating the idea?
Everyone, right? Everyone we thought would be interested in this product, we try to talk to. And
Yeah.
that was every blockchain idea, right? That's how we found out, like, oh, EHR, this is the problem. Oh, title insurance, this is the problem. Oh, automotive, this is the bottlenecks, right?
Yeah.
And it's not when you hit a bottleneck to say, like, it's not going to work. It's, is this a bottleneck that I think I can get over?
Can I solve it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do
And
I have the resources, maybe
connections, network, right?
the knowledge to do this? If not, I'll pass and go to the next
Yeah.
idea.
And so with the smart irrigation system, the bottleneck was, okay, the market demand isn't really there, so we don't really know how big of a pain point this is for anyone right now.
Yeah.
And then two, we don't really want to wait for that pain point to become a problem, because we're just sitting around waiting.
Yeah.
And then three, this is a lot of products we have to develop. Like you're saying, we have to develop a sensor, we have to develop a new type of sprinkler that has to be now robust, and we have this wireless connectivity issue, we have this battery issue. And so that's a lot of hardware to build. And so if anything, it was like, okay, well, either way, in order for this to exist, we have to work on the sensor. So let's first focus on the sensor, right? And so that's what we did, was we first focused on the sensor. And then we still didn't really quite know exactly which market to target, but we knew, like, okay, the sensor at least solved my personal problem with understanding plants better.
Yeah.
So then we went and sought out.
And you're saying were you working on this with other people?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah. So the other two co-founders, like, they were with me since the blockchain days, and so
Okay.
we were just. And
Were
this
they
is
colleagues from the U? Like, were they friends? Like, how did you guys?
Yeah, so up to this point, I had a really hard time building good teams, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
every team prior to this, I was in bands, had other businesses, and that was always the struggle. And this is what everyone talks about, is like, how do you find good founding team members?
Yeah.
The answer to that today is you need a better network. And if you're surrounded by a lot of creators and builders, it's actually very easy to get a good founding team, because now you're surrounded by people who all get it and know what it takes, and all experience. But if you don't have that, then it is like a guessing game and chance. And so for me, it was, one of them is a colleague, so he came from the biotech world with me, and so but that's the thing, is we both loved building, right? And so we would spend our time learning how to build anything from wood, anything. We would just always be coming up and building and showing off, like, oh, this little thing I built today. And then the third was actually an introduction from my father-in-law. So his colleague's son came in, and really that one was just I'm really open, or I used to be more open to just giving everyone opportunities, and that one actually just worked out in our favor really well. So that was like a stroke of luck, right? Because you see
Combination of network and luck on that one to
Yep,
get like
yep,
a good team member.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. Because you get other ones that just because like by this time now we've been working on this for a couple years, right? And people lose their attention span, or they're like, my motivation's gone, or my priorities have shifted. I don't want to waste my time doing this when I can be making passive income doing something else.
You're having all these conversations. You come to the realization that, like, okay, maybe the whole system the market's not ready for, and the sprinkler system and stuff. But at the point that you decided to focus on the sensor, did you realize at that point that you're like, okay, the sensor is the right place to focus because it can solve my personal plant problem? Or it's like, well, you're still kind of focused on, if we were going to do this big system, that's how, that's where we'd have to start. And so if it's not, then I'm curious, like, at what point did it dawn on you, like, oh, that goes back to, like, I could just stick this in my home plants and save it like one plant at a time, kind of a concept.
So that was I did build the sensors, right? Because I was solving my own problem. So that product was already existing and alive, and it solved my problem. And my wife even saw that. She's like, out of everything you build in this house, everything you thought about, she's like, I really think this is like the product you need to make. She's like, I think you really need to focus on this one. And I was like, it's got hardware. Like my app was like bare bones, right? You
Yeah.
literally had to write in terminal commands
Yeah.
to like get things to work on there.
Glad you built it yourself.
Yeah, mhm.
Okay.
yeah. It's just a bare minimum, right? Like
Yeah.
even like my sensors had like wires and stuff hanging out because this is just for me. I'm like,
Yeah.
this doesn't need to be pretty; it just needs to do what I want it to do,
Yeah.
and that's all I care about, right? So it's ugly, very ugly, not user friendly. But what it revealed was two things. So we did market validation, and so the way you can do that very cheaply, like I was saying, is there's platforms that have a lot of people on there, like user interviews or respondent, that you can get access for very cheap, right? And so there, and even if you like, there's I want to say hack it, but there's like ways to get data for free. And so for us, it was I created a campaign on there on respondent, and I created a
The
screener.
platform's called Respondent.
Yeah, mhm.
Okay.
And just
There's
gets
other platforms
Yep,
like that.
mhm.
Okay.
It just gets you access to people to talk to, right? Because that's the other bottleneck is like
Okay.
you're just surrounded by family and friends, and that's actually the worst people to get market
Yeah.
validation from because
Yeah.
your mom doesn't want to, just make you feel bad and tell your idea sucks. So you need to talk to people who don't know you that will just be like, no, this is dumb.
Yeah.
Like, I think you should do this instead.
Sorry, Respondent. You put this idea out there.
And
Why
yes,
do people go on Respondent?
because you get paid. You
Okay.
can make like $5
All right,
for
so
answering
you're
like a
paying
survey.
a minimal amount.
Not yet. So
Okay.
the first part is you have to do a screener, right? You have to find the people that meet who you want to be
Okay.
talking to.
This is who you think your target audience
Yeah,
is.
and so this is what I'm saying. This is where you can get free data. Is our screener survey just had questions of like, do you like plants? Okay. How many plants do you have? Okay. Do you struggle with plants? Okay. What are the issues you have with plants? Got it. And then what have you done to like solve these issues, right? And so from there, and then I was like, what's your title? Like, what do you do for work? How old are you? Right? How much do you spend on plants?
Yeah.
Like all this
This is all
screener
the
survey.
Screener
Screener
survey. You're
survey.
basically getting all the data from the
Yeah,
screener survey.
for
Okay.
free, right? And so on Respondent,
great hack.
they say like, hey, if you get 50 responses to any campaign, that's like really good on our platform. We had 3,000 responses.
Wow.
So already a market indicator like, okay, a lot of people care about plants.
Yeah.
And not only that, a lot of people struggle with keeping their plants alive. And exactly within my screener survey, I already got a lot of that demographic, psychographic information right off the bat, right?
Yeah.
For free. I didn't even spend a dime at this point yet. That's what I'm saying. Like, you could do market research for very, very cheap, right?
Yeah.
And from there, I'm like, oh, great. These guys have used our competitors' apps. Awesome. This is good because that means that didn't solve their problem, right? Which we knew.
At the point, who were your competitors?
Like plant care apps. So a lot of these like plant care apps that a lot of people use that have AI vision built in, and they say like, hey, we'll take your picture of your sick plant and we'll automatically tell you what's wrong with it, and
Okay.
it doesn't work at all.
Because it's too late. By the
It's too
time
late.
there's a picture
Yeah,
of
it doesn't know.
it's
It
too
knows
late.
just as much as you. Like yellow leaf means any of these things. Like I don't know. I don't have the data.
Right.
So it's good to see that, right? And it's good to see that not only it's good to see a couple things that they've tried your competitors' products because that means they're actively trying to solve this problem, and two that they're spending money, right?
Yeah.
So now it's like okay, and then you start seeing different groups of people. So there's some people that spent thousands and thousands of dollars a year on plants, right? And there's some people that spent like $5 a year on plants.
Yeah.
And so we had this really good insights into like, okay, and then you can even see like who's spending $1,000 a year on plants, and you're like, oh, they're like a doctor, got it. They have like they're up, they have higher salaries, and then you look at the age range, and you're like, okay. So then we're like, okay, I think we have a good customer profile right now. We like older millennials that have higher paying income jobs, and they go crazy with plants right now.
Yeah.
And let's just talk to them, right? And so then we start talking to them. That's when I started paying, $5, $10 per interview. But here's the other trick you can do is you always say like, hey, let's do a 15-minute interview. I'll pay you $5, $10, which anyone's like, cool, done. And then what happens is if they really
Are
love
there higher net worth individuals on Respondent, like people who are doctors, like they actually do spend time on that platform?
Yeah,
That's
it's crazy,
insane.
right? Even
That's
business
so crazy.
owners.
That's crazy. Okay.
Because one, I
Thanks
think
so
it
much.
gives them insights into maybe because there's even business people on there, and I'm like, I don't know if you're on here to get money or you're here to like get a read on what's trending.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're doing the reverse
Yeah.
market research.
Espionage.
Yeah. But what's cool was after our first round of interviews, we would then follow up and be like, hey, like I want to talk to you some more, dig deeper. Happy to pay you more for your time. And this is where they're like, nah, I'm in. Like, this is cool. I just want to be part of this now. Like,
Wow.
happy to support you. So don't even worry about that. And
There was already an early emotional attachment to what you were trying to accomplish.
correct.
That's
Yep.
cool.
And so that market validation came in. And then the other side was we started hunting for the data, right? So right now, Credo was, oh, well, we're a plant care app with a plant sensor. We're a consumer product, right? But when you now talk to VCs that's not a very VC friendly type company, right? It has a lot of costs right now. Sound, like they're like, that's expensive.
Yeah.
And not a lot of margins. And so they're, so at this point we joined an accelerator. So this is when I finally quit my job, had enough money saved to give myself a shot for 3 years. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna try it. 3 years. If I fail, jobs are always there.
Up to live on your current lifestyle. 3 years. Did you have a partner or spouse?
Yep.
You guys, you mentioned your wife. Right? So you were together with your wife. Did she buy into this, I guess?
She's been pushing me for years, right? She's like, get out of this job. You hate it. Like, you're not good.
Soul-sucking career.
Yeah. And so, awesome. It wasn't
okay,
the same.
So really good support. You had a 3-year runway of like, okay, I can last for 3 years. Let's go for it.
Yep.
And then what incubator did you jump into?
So we jumped into an accelerator called Founder Institute, which is like pre-idea, really early. So it's earlier than Y Combinator. Like those guys want some traction, some sort of validation.
Okay, cool. And Founder Institute will like take.
It's early, yeah. So all they do is you take like a personality exam, you take an open intelligence exam, which is like pattern recognition, which is actually a really cool test, and then you have an interview with them, right? And then if you get accepted, this is what's cool. That's different than any other accelerator. Is other ones you get accepted, you can stay in, right? Like you can coast, you don't have to really do anything, and you'll graduate. But this one is because you're so early, they really want to put you through the ringer. So it's like almost like a Navy SEAL boot camp for accelerators. And so if you underperform at any day or during the week of the 4-month program, you get kicked out.
Wow.
You get kicked out of the program, right? So you had to work and keep up. And so for me, that was my biggest imposter syndrome. So, right, I'm a technical founder. My other co-founders are all technical, right? So none of us really had a business background or even access to a network of business people. And so that's what Founder Institute was for us. One, to validate, like, can we do this? Do we have what it takes? And then two, network, right? If we do well. So that's the other thing is they rank you. So it's not only do you get kicked out, but you get ranked. So you actually know exactly how well you're performing within your cohort. And so for us, COVID hit. We were part of the Silicon Valley, so they have a global presence. So they have programs all over the world. Okay. It's all virtual now, and so in traditionally
prior to COVID, it was in person.
Yeah, in person in Silicon Valley, and you'd be there for 4 months, right? Okay. So even bigger commitment, which actually, would be probably even better, but whatever. Yeah. So we did it remote, and I came in, and I'm now with there's 130 people started, and I'm with people that have business backgrounds. I'm like, what are you doing here? Like people from Wharton, Stanford, Harvard, MIT, Penn. I'm like, why are you here? Don't you know everything to know about business? Like, what more do you have? Yeah. And I beat all of them, right? So I ended up number one in the program. Only 23 were left at the very end, right? Wow. So out of 130, 23 ended up, and I was number one. Wow. And I was always told, like, hey, if you're top 3, doors open up for you because they're going to now, so they, within their portfolio, they have a select portfolio. So they have a 2% portfolio that they now give access to really deep network individuals that will really help move things along. So I was like, I want to be part of that. That sounds awesome. Yeah. And so I'm like, how do I be part of that? And they're like, I'd be top 3. And I'm like, okay. So number one. And then that happened. So I was like, awesome. And then, so this is 4 months into my jumping into the water, right? Of let's take the risk and do this. A month later, we finished the program, and what the program really teaches you is, one, how to think about your business critically, financial modeling, how to talk about your business intelligently, so pitching, and then
just really nailing product market fit. I would
that and then doing the things that aren't sexy, right? Financial modeling, talking to customers, that was part of the criteria. Is hey, this week you need to talk to 100 customers. Yeah. And then you go out and do it, right? How many people want to do that, right? I have to talk to 100 people. And the next week they're like, now you have to talk to 200 people.
Dang.
And so
that's such a good exercise. Yeah. I mean, especially for a creator, right? And I don't know. I mean, you seem like you have a very outgoing personality, but I would assume, stereotypically speaking, someone who is a scientist, spends a lot of time in the lab, and is very cerebral like you are, very intelligent. Going out and talking to 100 people on the street is maybe the worst thing that they could ever imagine doing.
Yeah, so here's
so hard.
The funny thing is was very introverted. I didn't know you could become extroverted.
Really?
I didn't know that was a thing that can happen. Yeah. And so, yeah, exactly. I was like, that made me uncomfortable, right? I was never comfortable talking, presenting. I could do it, and I had a good presence, but I was never like excited about it, right? So it turns out you can learn, you can adapt, right? We can grow, you know? And so I still have the very first pitch video of the very first day, because they made us do it.
Yeah.
I have that. And just within 4 months, I'm like, man, like, look how much growth happened in 4 months. Like, oh my gosh, like I was so awkward on the camera.
Yeah.
And then so 2 weeks after that, we are in a pitch competition here at Silicon Slopes. And this is something that years before I always wanted to do, right? Like I was not jealous, but I was admirable of. I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like I want to be a company up there on stage pitching one day. That's like, this is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
And that was 2 years prior to me jumping full time in, right? And then even then I was trying to meet these investors, that people, you know, all these big wigs in the community.
Yeah.
And so here I am. And I'm like, this is cool. Like, I'm on that stage now 2 years later. And so this is awesome. This is exciting, right? And, you know, in my head, it's like, there's no way we're going to win. Like, we're pre-revenue. We're just an idea right now. One thing I have in my favor is I've been practicing this pitch for 4 months. So, like, I can pitch. But at the same time, right before that competition, my pitch deck just got ripped apart by the last, like, round of feedback, and so it was like in shatters, and then we got accepted and something got lost in our calendar. So essentially I just got an email saying like, hey, you're gonna be here at 8 a.m. tomorrow. And I'm like, what? Like, I didn't even know I got accepted. Like, what?
You know, like, crap, my whole thing that I had like perfected is now just been like torn apart. I'm starting over.
So that whole day, right, all the way until like I think 4 a.m, we were working on the deck, getting all ready, and then I got so tired that I couldn't even like work on my pitch yet, right, for the new deck. And I was like, oh, I'll just show up early. I just need to like sleep a little bit, show up early, and then I'll work on it and we'll have it done, right? Show up, and of course they're just like pulling us around, you know, connecting us to all these people, taking photos, doing all this stuff. And I was like, okay, I'm not really having time. And then I finally get to sit down and they're like, hey, Eric, you're up first. And I'm like, okay, I don't have any time. And so I go up there and I pitch. And it was awesome. I actually delivered a really good pitch, and I loved it because the difference now was before it was really well rehearsed and memorized, right? So it was almost robotic. This one was just from the gut because I knew the material so well, so deeply. That didn't really matter that I changed the slide order or, you know, what the content's like. I saw it and I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what I want to talk about for the next 30 seconds on this slide, right? And so it actually came out really natural, really confident, and made me realize I'm like, oh, it's actually better to just have like a high level overview of what you want to pitch about, and then when what comes out, right? And so then that week they were like, hey, we'll select the next top 10 and then you'll go to the next round, right? And I was like, that would be the coolest thing is if we meet top 10, there's no way we're going to win, but top 10, that's a validation of like we know what we're talking about. Anyway, long story short, we end up winning the thing.
Nice.
And I get a check, and now my first check-in is from a VC that's giving me $250K. And I'm like, whoa, like this happened. I gave myself 3 years for this to happen. This happened in 4 months. Like, dang, okay. And then that triggered this cascading effect where, because it was public, right? And so now everyone was hitting us up. Right before it was an idea that people were like, maybe. And now they're like, hey, I want to give you some money. Like, this is really cool. Like, all right. And so we got friends and family that started coming in. And then I went really quickly from no one to someone in the community, right? And it was simply because of that one event where a lot of eyes are watching it. But what we also did was after that, we actually won every pitch competition that year. We swept the whole entire.
How many did you do?
We did 3.
Wow.
Yeah, so we did, and we won every single one.
All of them. Awesome.
And so
were they all attached to like prizes? Like you got monetary prizes? Okay.
Oh yeah, so we
So
got
piling
almost
up all
like,
this really good cash.
and
It's great.
it's flipped, right? Because the other problem of building the network community now has come to me. Like now as someone that people want to talk to, right? That's like my LinkedIn presence. That's all within the last 2 years, right? I never used LinkedIn before, and that everything I have, like I even when I finally was like, I'm gonna grow my LinkedIn profile. I deleted everyone on there because it was essentially like an equivalent of my Facebook profile. It was like friends of, friends and family. Like I'm like, no, LinkedIn's like professional. I really want people in the network to be a value add to me and other people, right? So I got rid of everyone. And then now, like, how many? Like, I have over 1,000 connections now,
Yeah.
and that all happened within 2 years, right? Like that's a lot of people
Yeah.
that I'm talking to.
I think that's how. I think a ton of my network is in that Silicon Slopes kind of network, and so I'm pretty sure that I first heard your name probably associated with that pitch competition and with being one of the finalists and winning or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably where I first heard about it. And then as I started learning more about the product, I was like, oh, this is like really cool. I want to get to know this guy. I want to meet this guy and hear the story. So
Awesome.
This is cool. Okay, so you're going through like how this all came about,
Right.
and this, and almost it sounds like you were kind of surprised about this is a little easier than you thought it might have been with the 3-year plan.
Mm-hmm.
You're like less than a year into it. You've already got some funding. There's the team of 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you start adding people to the team right away, or you like kept the team at 3?
So now we start building,
Okay.
right? Now we need to get an MVP out there. Now we need to figure out the back
Oh wait, I
end.
want to circle back on the pitch that you won.
Mm-hmm.
Was it the consumer-based sensor in like a personal plant thing?
Mm-hmm.
So at some point between going through did the Founder Institute help you kind of refine it down to that idea? And that's where you're like, okay, we're going after consumers. We're going to ditch like the whole sprinkler system kind of concept, and we're going to like individual plant sensor kind of plant care stuff.
No, so we came in with that idea already. What it did though was it helped me create.
Even prior to Founder Institute, you
Yes.
kind of refined it
Yeah.
down to that.
Mhm.
Okay.
And then but there were still issues, right? Of like it was still like very consumer heavy, expensive product. And we did a lot of market validation.
How much did you like think it was going to cost initially for a sensor?
I mean, we knew where we had to be, so I didn't know how much it was going to cost. I knew what I had to stay under.
Yeah.
Right from our survey data, I was like, it has to be like cheaper than this, or else we have no.
Which was what?
It had to be less than $25.
Wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you're
Right.
building this new thing that's like the sensor and like the chip and the brains and everything.
But we had a lot of off-the-shelf components, and so I already kind of have a gauge with just off-the-shelf components. We were at $40, right? And so
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, like if we made this in-house, it's
Could
gotta
scale this. We
be
could probably
cheaper.
Get this in
Yeah,
half or something.
easy, right?
Yeah.
So that wasn't too bad, but it was more the financial modeling of how do I get you a sensor into every plant and not just a sensor,
Yeah.
because that's not useless to me. And then really, right back to what I was saying about the VC attractiveness, what it revealed was when we found out that the databases were empty, that's really when the light bulb hit, and it was like,
we're gonna
oh.
get so much valuable data, and then the VCs are like, oh. Okay, now we're
And
talking.
so that's what we were talking about in the pitch, right? Of like how this can change the world and how we approach science and research and everything. And of course, it kept.
Plant data, like the global plant data database or whatever, right? Yeah.
Yep. But like if you have recording, I'm sure the recordings still exist. If you watch those 2 years ago, I was talking about this differently. And over time, you just iterate, and the more people talk to you, you keep refining, and you're like, that's a good point. Like, how do we get past that? And then I'm now, okay, like this is how we can do it.
Yeah.
You start exploring other industries, right? Because the other thing is timing, right? Is right now, like 2021 was the heyday. That was the pinnacle of everything. So a lot of money flowing. And then we hit a complete stall the next year. And then it was like, that's part of business too, is you need to adapt. If you can't adapt, you won't survive. And that's all business is survive as long as you can. And if you do, you'll probably end up like at the top.
So how much money did you raise like that first year with the competitions and some VC money and stuff?
So we raised about $650K.
Okay, so 650, and with your team of 3, you're like, okay, we've got some significant runway, but we've got to add some more people to the team. So you're starting to scale burn.
So we didn't add anyone. We hired contractors, right? So we
Okay.
hired an ID team. So they developed the product that looks today.
Yeah.
And this is all like I'm learning, right? I didn't even know what industrial design meant. I'm like, what do you even do? So I learned, and I was like, oh, okay, like this is cool, good. And then our UI, the UX had updates, so we had to hire someone to design all that.
Yeah.
And then we had So fortunately, the CTO Max, he could develop and code, so he coded all of it. At the time, I had all my firmware coded on the sensor, and then we passed that off to an electrical engineering team that now is working on So once the ID was designed, we knew how it had to look and everything. Then we went to the electrical engineering team and told them like, this is.
How did you find all these resources? Was it through your network? Was it through the VCs? Like, did you have people that were introducing you, like, hey, here's a great electrical engineering firm. Here's a great like industrial design firm.
Yeah, so it was a mix of a lot of different, probably like one of all the above.
Okay.
And that's actually where, if we look back, we've had a lot of mistakes and errors with hiring good people.
Yeah.
And that's just a problem that I don't know how to solve yet, because it's hard, right? It's hard to
Yeah.
vet, especially if it's coming from someone who's referring it. And actually, now the way I vet is if you will vouch for them with your blood, with your life, I will take that meeting and consider working with them.
Yeah, that's a pretty steep requirement.
But if you've never worked with them and you just like know who they are and you're introducing me, like,
not
no,
quite
thank
good
you,
enough,
like, because that's not like, I don't know how good they are, right? So we got really lucky with our industrial design team, and they set actually a really high precedence, because I was like, if everyone's like this is going to be easy, right? Like, if I pay this and get this level of product, like, easy.
Yeah.
And then that was like the last good team we ever hired, and everything was just like, man, like everything, right? Like even today, we've had manufacturing delays for over 6 months because we chose the wrong contract manufacturer, right?
Yeah.
And that really, really hurt us. We chose like the wrong web design team, right? Where something that should have taken 1 month ended up taking 7 months, you know? And this is just like, we don't have infinite runway, we don't have infinite time, and everything kind of connects to each other. And so it's like, it's frustrating, it's hard, but that's been the lesson this year, is like, got to be patient.
Yeah.
And also you have to like plan, right? So, and it's hard because in the early days, if you don't know anything about this and you've never done it before, you can't, because people, I even brought on a hardware advisor very, very early on, just to help prevent these type of mistakes.
Yeah.
And he would give me these timeframes. And I'm like, okay, that sounds good. And that's what we projected everything off of. And I'm like, okay, I'm like, next time, give me the worst case time frame, because that's what I need to project off of, not the ideal, because I've yet to have anything meet the ideal time frame. And so, right, because if you do that, and then we've seen companies in this space, consumer tech, even CPG is still really hard, right? They have different problems, go out of business because they just did not calculate, right? Even established companies, right? This is actually why Pebble watches went out of business, was because they forecasted it incorrectly, and they thought they were going to sell way more than they did, and they were left with all this excess inventory that hurt them, and they couldn't raise enough money to cover, and then boom, gone, right?
But it was crazy because it's such a cool product, right? Like,
so like product market fit,
like,
market demand, and you're like, how would a business like that go out of business?
Yeah, how did that happen? Yeah.
But this happens all the time. And so that's actually something I did early on, because in Founders Institute, we were told like, hey, you shouldn't do hardware. It's really hard.
Yeah.
And today I would actually say like, yeah, hardware is incredibly hard. But if you get through it, it's a really good competitive moat because of how freaking hard it is.
Yeah.
And now it's like, it's gotten to the point where I'm like, oh man, this is so rough. I don't think I'll do hardware again. And I'm like, oh wait, but I've learned so much that like now I should do more hardware.
Yeah. What you've learned. Yeah. That's a good point. You've paid the dues.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Now you should capitalize on that.
But at the time I was like, why does everyone keep saying that? Like, why does everyone like, hardware to me makes sense. You need hardware in the world. You need something to interact with. It can't just be all digital. And so I did retrospectives. I started studying companies, right? I looked at Pebble, and I would read the founder, like, what happened, right? And so that actually helped influence our business model of like, ooh, forecasting is a really big problem. And, the latest company to be affected is Peloton, right? Where you see it. And you can't predict any of this stuff of like, oh, COVID happened, market demand goes through the roof. They can't supply or cover enough of it, but they have a lot of money all of a sudden. So then they go and manufacture all of this. And by the time it's all done, the quality control slips, quality assurance slips, they're getting sued because people are getting hurt. And then by that time, COVID,
the demand is gone.
And now they're just left in their stock tanks because they didn't know that the stock market was going to do that either.
Yeah.
And so now they're like hanging on to dear life. Just to go, like, that happened within a year, right? That's insane. Like, that's an insane pendulum swing to be like, man, we have like billions of dollars right now, to be like, oh my gosh, we're going to go out of business in like 3 months.
Yeah. Okay, so you're rolling, but facing some challenges with a lot of these outsourced partners. I want to transition to, at some point in this journey, whether it was post like Founders Institute or whatever, you started becoming super passionate about this whole, it's way, way bigger than just a product. You became passionate about this cyberpunk versus solarpunk. Like, this is a global movement thing that you became almost kind of like religiously excited about, right? How and where did that happen, and where did you kind of be like, this is way bigger than a single plant sensor, this is making the environment, the world, a better place? And we'll kind of head maybe towards this, like how does this affect the mental health, kind of like what is this? This is like a huge global thing that you're trying to participate in, right?
Absolutely. So early on, we were focused about sustainability, e-waste, right? Those are things I cared about as a consumer myself, right? I just hate to have tech products that are in my attic that I can't do anything with because they're worth nothing, but
Yeah.
I don't want to throw it away because it is worth something, and
Yeah.
this doesn't belong in the landfill. So we want to solve that immediately. But yeah, we didn't realize how big plants were or how big the impact was or how disconnected everything was as we talked more and dug in deeper. And you start seeing all these cracks in the foundation, right?
Yeah.
Everywhere. And then it becomes really clear, right? So plants, yeah, it starts off as something like you think of like, oh, it's an aesthetic plant or it gives me food, but they do way more than that, right? And yes, exactly. You can link it all the way to your health. And then you realize like, who controls our moods? It's not our brain, it's our gut. What is controlling our gut? It's bacteria. Where does that bacteria come from? Oh, the dirt that my food comes from. Oh, well, then that's really important, right? And so now if I'm eating food that's been nuked with glyphosate and all these other compounds that make the earth dead, I'm probably not getting the right bacteria in my gut anymore. And then even the probiotics, prebiotics, they don't even know what the best combination is, right? The only real connection is like it comes from the dirt. And so if now that doesn't contain what I have, then you look at like, how's everyone feeling? It's like, well, we're living longer, but we're not feeling really good. And now you're seeing chronic illnesses, mental illnesses, and you're like, I think this is all, you see the patterns, right? You're like, this is all connected.
Wow. And so you started becoming very passionate about how all of these things were connected, given your like biology and microbiology kind of background. And you're like, hey, this is going to become really, really important. And here's a way that we can contribute to, it's cliche to say, but making the world a better place. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And to me, right, so, my younger self, my 20s, I chased money, right, like everyone does. And then I had access to it. And then I found myself consuming my time buying things and hoping to fill some void in myself, right, to like that happiness. And the more I made, the more I bought, and the more that void kept growing, honestly. And so it got to a point where I kind of just sat back and realized, right, like this was kind of that pivotal moment when I was like, I can jump into Credo because I don't need to spend so much money because I really don't need all this stuff, right? And I actually offloaded a lot of stuff. So like, yeah, I have a recording studio. I'm really into music. I have a lot of music equipment, or I had even more. But right, like, so as a 20-year-old, you would love to have like the best premium Gibson, Les Paul, like the Fender Strats, all the name brands, right? Like who wouldn't, right?
Yeah.
And then I bought all of them. And then I was so afraid to use them because they were so freaking expensive. And so I wouldn't even play them. And then you couldn't even display them because they had to be in a case in order, like I couldn't humidify my entire apartment or home at the time. And so they were just in a case, sight unseen, and I didn't even touch them. And then I would just have cases of them in my closet. And I'm like, man, what
am I doing?
Yeah. And then what I was like, what am I playing? And I'm playing my dinky old cheap guitar, right?
Yeah.
The one that I'm like, I don't care about this thing. But I'm like, this is what do I get fulfillment from? Is it looking at a case of a guitar that's in it and saying like, hey, I own that, but I'd never touch it? Or like just playing music and creating, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the connection. I was like, oh, it's the latter. It's playing music and creating. And so all this other stuff is valueless to me. So like, get rid of it, right? It's actually just creating more stress and anxiety every time I think about it.
Yeah.
And so that pivotal change then changed how I saw other things in life of like, okay, you really can't pursue anything new with the intention of just making money. If you do that, you can, but what you'll find out is when you talk about resiliency, grit, perseverance, stress, anxiety, handling all the hard stuff coming your way, money is not enough, and you hear this from everyone, right? Is not enough to push you through it, right?
Now you're starting to realize, okay, I'm pursuing a purpose. And yes, you want to have a profitable business. I mean, there's the famous like no money, no mission, right? You've got to be able to like fund your pursuit, your mission. But now you're going at this thing with this incredible amount of passion for solving global problems, both of the environment, plant health, plant knowledge, and the sharing of plant knowledge, and the mental health of people and the connection that we have to our bio environment, right? And that is the juice that you need to get through like all of the setbacks and the frustrations and the all the tough stuff about bringing an idea to life and being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So, right, when you're trying to bring something new to the world, it's hard. It's just hard, right? You're going to hear a lot of naysayers. You're going to hear a lot of negativity. You're going to hear a lot of people saying it's stupid. You're going to hear a lot of people saying, I don't think this is going to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of just negative energy, right?
Yeah.
Saying like, da, da, da. And so, yeah, you have to look internally and you need to come up with that energy to combat that, or you will succumb to it, right?
Yeah.
But here's the cool thing that happens when you have a mission and purpose-driven company is, you hear a lot of people talking about retaining talent,
Yeah.
hiring talent,
Yeah.
building community and all that, and how to do it and all this, and here are the tricks to do all that.
Yeah.
And I'm over here being like, it's actually pretty easy if you just have because I don't need to go to you and be like, here's our culture. Memorize this.
Yeah.
Get into your head, believe in it,
Yeah.
become it, right?
Yeah.
And every day I'm going to keep telling you, like, you need to be this. This is who you are at this company. But it's completely different if you're coming to me being like, I believe in everything you're talking about. I want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Then it's like,
I
oh,
already subscribe to this. I feel at home here. This is my community. This is my tribe.
Mhm.
That's how you build an amazing team rather than trying to brainwash 5 core values and shove that down somebody's throat.
correct, right? Because when it gets tough, what happens? People leave.
Yeah.
Right now, we've gone through a lot of tough stuff together, right? And all it's doing is bringing us closer together. And no part of my mind is like anyone just going to leave because it's tough because, right? Everyone's like, no, this needs to exist. We have to be the ones that brings this into reality, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, awesome. Like,
How big's your team now?
so we have 6 people.
Okay. So grew from the core 3 just to 6, and you use a lot of like contractors, outsource, whatever, to do a lot of that stuff, which I kind of like. I'm more of a fan of like small, nimble, but incredibly Navy SEAL team kind of like we'll die together kind of teams rather than hundreds of employees. Because to your point, it is, I mean, I don't want to say almost impossible, because there are big organizations who've incredibly and impressively accomplished this, but it's almost impossible to get past, I don't know, call it 50 people even, or even 100 people for everyone to be bought in at that passionate level, right? Because at some point there's enough jobs that need to be filled that it's just a job for someone, right? I think that's a good mindset, and it's good for us to talk about that as small, nimble, highly passionate, really motivated teams. And I don't think well, I think it is related actually, but I think for me, it's a lot more enjoyable way to do business, right? It's sort of these highly motivated people that are just as passionate about accomplishing something. And time after time, we've seen companies do amazing things with like very, very small, nimble teams. You had this really amazing kind of passionate explanation or expose or whatever about the cyberpunk versus solar punk kind of a thing. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so everyone should keep in mind, right, is yin and yang always exist together. It has to. And so you've all seen examples of what a cyberpunk futures look like, right? We have Blade Runner, we have crypto. Was that Cyberpunk? No, that was like the game, right? Cyberpunk is literally called Cyberpunk. We have a lot of story, we have a lot of books, we have a lot of content on that future. So we know very clearly what that aesthetic and that future looks like, right? And when you sit down and think about it, it's not a good future. It's a dystopia, right? Like that's kind of what all of this content is trying to warn you about. Is like, hey, like this is what it looks like. Don't keep going down this road, right? Unless you want to live in this world. If that's it, then like, okay, like this is what it's going to look like. Yeah. And it's not great. But the counter to it is a solar punk, right? And so a cyberpunk is really, like you described, a very autonomous, AI-driven, humans are kind of just there, but without purpose anymore. The planet has been completely destroyed to a point of no recovery. We're looking ways for escape, right? Either in a virtual world or to an off planet. But we messed up. We screwed it up, and right, we have like horrible air, like fire season, and all these things that's already coming
we
up.
were laughing about.
Yeah.
There's a thing called fire season now,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Like my grandparents, it wasn't even a thing, but now we've got a thing that's called fire.
Wasn't a thing
season.
in our life.
It's so crazy,
Right? Like it wasn't a thing for us.
Yeah.
And now that kids are used to it and people are just like, oh yeah, this is normal. It's like, oh my gosh, like this is bad. This is really bad. So solar punk is really, kind of back to what you're pointing out with Avatar is like it's a future where we're living harmoniously with nature. We've reconnected ourselves and re-implemented ourselves into the ecosystem. And we're back in balance. So we're no longer just taking, but we're taking what we need and then adding and replacing what we took, right? And so like I hear all the time of these smart cities, right? Like the Point, for example, is going to be this smart community. And when I talk to the people behind it, it's like there's nothing smart about this. It should just be called a connected community. That's it. It's just connected to the internet. That's all that you've done, right? But when you look at the designs, like plants aren't part of the design integration, right? There's exterior plants, but they're not designed other than aesthetics, right? But like these plants could be doing a purpose. The new buildings should all have greenhouses built into them, right? That takes in the extra heat, reuses the water, right? We're talking about water. We're in Utah, and it blows my mind that we use fresh water once and then we throw it away. And so, so a solar punk future really is just a future where we need. So the way we can create this future is I can't do it myself. I need more people, other listeners. I need you guys to create content, right? So if any of you haven't heard solar punk before, that's a problem. Like we've all heard Cyberpunk. How come we haven't heard solar punk, right?
The problem is that everyone's heard of Cyberpunk and nobody's really heard the term solar punk, or we're not using it in
because we're not creating
popular culture.
Yeah, we're not creating content for it. We're not. I want people to write stories about it. I want people to create video games about it. I want people to create content on it, right? Because we need to show people like there is another side to this, and it's not just this doom and gloom. There's this other side. And no one's creating content for it because no one really knows about it. But the second we do that, then everyone understands like, oh, and then now we can create companies that are starting to build products that the people are writing about, right? Like the sci-fi writers. That's where a lot of inspiration comes from me. I'm like, you don't need to really sit here and come up with you won't come up with a whole new novel idea. If you want inspiration, just read sci-fi and be like, how can I bring nanobots to the world? Like, how am I going to do that? Right? And what's cool is that I'm part of the wave, and I want everyone who's listening to be part of the wave, right? We're making it happen. So that's what's cool about something that doesn't exist, means that we have the opportunity to define it now and create it, right? Yeah. And so, exactly. Like I'm seeing, like my nephews, my sister-in-law is a school counselor, and she's always telling me like, oh man, kids are like so depressed, suicidal. They're addicted to alcohol and nicotine already. And I'm like, how old are they? And she's like 10. I'm like, what? Yeah. Like, you're 10. You've been on this world for 10 years and you're like this miserable already? Like, oh my gosh. Yeah. And I get it, right? Because you look at social media, you hear the parents, right? And everyone has that same negative energy that's coming. And so, I would feel that way if that's all I'm getting. And so we need to create this other type of content. And I'm part of it. And that's the cool thing is we're connected. That's why I have so much purpose and passion about this is the more founders I meet, the other, other creators, builders, we're all aligned on this. And so now we're forming more and more companies that are like, okay, like how do we want to do this? How do we want to? And so when you think about like, oh, all these big events that happen in our history, and then you look like, oh, these are the core people involved. This is it. This is happening right now, right? Yeah. And I can't do this alone. Like I need everyone to be a part of this. And that's kind of like what's so cool about this podcast is it is a part of it now. But when I go into someone's home and I see a very big collection of plants, that I'm like, wow, this is like not only the amount of time, energy, like this took a lot of effort, right? This to me is really cool, right? I just barely finished a planted aquarium that's a 100% self-sustaining aquarium. So it has freshwater plants, has an axolotl in it, and it has ghost shrimp, and everything is in balance to the point where, again, I'm no longer needed, right? Wow. If I get involved, it breaks the system. So I should just stay away from it and just refill the tank whenever it needs it. That's it. That's all I need to do.
It doesn't require any power.
Oh, it requires power. So it has like a filter and everything. Yeah. It needs power, but it doesn't need me to change the water out weekly. It doesn't need me to constantly add additives to rebalance whatever. Like it's balanced, right? So The bacteria is consuming all the waste from the animals, and then that creates food for the plants, and then the plants are generating algae, and then the ghost shrimp eat all the algae, and then the axolotl
And
eats
the
shrimp.
plants the animals in there, will they have multiple generations? Like you won't have to like keep buying more and putting them in
Yeah, so that's exactly what I'm trying.
At the top of your aquarium.
So that's what I'm trying to get right now is establishing the ghost shrimp colony, right, to the point where it's surpassing the axolotl's consumption, and then there within that ecosystem, there's places for them to breed.
Okay.
But that just shows like how beautiful a balanced ecosystem is, right?
Yeah.
It really doesn't require that much energy or all this like tinkering. It's self-balanced, and that's really, if you now think of it at a macro level, that's all you have to do with the planet is just rebalance it, right? If you keep burning trees down, you keep killing the coral reefs, like you keep getting rid of the mangroves. Like I was just talking to people in Florida, and they're like, oh yeah, because I was like, oh, isn't algae like a huge problem? They're like, yeah, it is. And I'm like, what happened? They're like, they cut down all the mangroves. And I'm like, why? And they're like, property.
Build a parking lot, right? Isn't that the song? Like, put up a parking lot.
And then they're like, in Costa Rica, they like understand this very well, and so they keep all that. And guess what? Algae's not a problem for them. And I'm like,
Interesting.
Like, and now I get there's some company out there trying to solve this algae problem, and they're going to make this high fancy tech solution that this machine will like suck it all out and do all this, and just put back the mangroves, get rid of that parking lot. Like, come on.
Maybe what we can end up on is, in the brand sweat and tears, kind of this whole concept is the emotional and psychological journey of being a founder. What has that been like for you?
Yeah, definitely having your spouse's support is huge. And I mean, she's part of the company now. So like, that's how deep we're in this together. Nice. Right. So yeah, that is huge. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it feels like, you hear this from other founders, like you're staring in an abyss, right? You're just like, man, like, am I off on this? Like, I'm just getting so many no's from VCs. Like, I get all this other validation from people, but like no one's putting the money in. So like, how are we going to make this happen? And so, yeah, you can really easily become negative about it and talk yourself out of it very quickly, right? So that's a choice. But that's the thing, is that's a choice. You can choose to have those thoughts, and you can choose to spend energy on those thoughts, and you can choose to make that a reality. Or you can choose the other, like, well, what if this works? What if we accomplish this? What if we make this happen, right? Then that to me is like, that's where the energy and fuel comes from, because then it's like, oh man, this would be huge. This would change everything. This would be monumental.
What if we could do this?
Yeah, and that's what I tell a lot of people is like, just focus on the what if positives, right? Like, especially if you're fundraising and you're raising money for your company. I hear so many people like, what if I don't raise money? It's like, well, yeah, like, you're done then, right?
Yeah.
Or is that truly the reality? It's like, would you really be done if you can't raise this much?
Yeah.
Or like, what if you just raise 25,000 more? How much more runway would that get you? A couple months? Okay. Then that's a new problem in 2 months, right?
Yeah.
Just get 25,000 in. And then in the next 2 months, like, try and get, same thing again, right? If you can get 25,000 every 2 months, is that enough to keep you going to a certain critical point where you can get more, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, but you talk to a lot of founders, a lot of builders, and the pattern and the stories are always the same, right? They're like, no one believed in me. All the VCs thought I was the dumbest company. And then now today you're like, well, you're doing $100 million in revenue. You're a unicorn. You're, you just sold for $1 billion, and you're saying like, no one believed in you. And they're like, yep. And that's to the point where I'm like, that's just how it is.
That's the pattern.
Yeah. That's like almost like the trial of like, do you have what it takes?
Yeah.
If you can get through this, then you will become like the legendary now, right? And if you can't, then this is not meant for you.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the motion anxiety is just handling that, right? Is it's a lot of framing and perspective and how you want to work on it in your mind. And so it does require a lot of self-awareness and introspection. And so you have to work on yourself. And so that's actually what I did was last year, right? Because like, this is a really weird time to be building a company, right? 2021, heyday, anyone could raise millions and millions of dollars. 2022, not so great. People said 2023, things should get better. It's getting worse. Now, like 2024 should get better. And I'm like, who knows? We'll see.
Yeah.
So this is like, we don't know, right? There's so much happening right now in the entire economy, with people, everything that's like such in flux. And so all I can do, like, so I have no touch into like what the future could be, right? So all I have now is like, what can I do and control now? And that's actually the tip and trick. Like if you meet mindset coaches, if you meet spiritual people, if you meet pro athletes, if you meet anyone that's at a very high level of stress within their like job and profession, they tell you like, yeah, you gotta like focus on the now. If you focus on the future, you're gonna feel a lot of anxiety because you can't control anything in the future.
Yeah.
And then you focus on the past, you're gonna be depressed because yeah, you've made mistakes. You had to learn, right? And that's also the other thing is the words you choose to use changes how you feel, right? A mistake to me is like, well, in order to learn, you have to like make mistakes or fail, right? So that to me is like I just call it learning. That's just learning.
Yeah.
It's not making a mistake. And like to like bad means like the good exists, or you have like there's good, there's bad, right? And success means there's failure, right? So if you use any of those words, then there's the opposite that exists, and so you're already setting yourself up for one or the other of those scenarios. And when you do that, it makes it like it's one or the other, right? And so you don't have to be in that state. Instead, you can choose to say like, oh, I'm gonna do like I'm just gonna do my best.
Yeah.
And if you do that, then really, then that's like then you did your best. And so when you look back, it's like I couldn't have done any more with what I knew at the time or what I had available to me, right?
Yeah.
Now, yeah, I've learned, so I can do things a bit differently. And so, yeah, for last year, we fundraised and we raised money. And not only that, we went up in valuation, which everyone else is doing the opposite, right? And this year, we need to raise again, and we're going to try and go up in valuation again. And there's a lot, even more headwinds, right? And it's even harder, right? Because now even the VCs now are starting to collapse, right? With SVB and all the banks that happen. It's like, okay. But to me, it's like, well, we made it last year. We're going to try and make it again this year. And then next year we'll deal with whatever problems come. You know, like that's the thing is you're always going to have problems coming your way. That's a guarantee, right? It's more about how you choose to handle those problems when they come and how you respond to them. And if you're going to let them destroy your day, destroy your week, destroy your month, destroy everything. Or if you're going to just be like, you know, this is just it. This is just
the process.
Yeah. And like every week I'm like, I'm sure we'll have problems this week.
But I think the joy and the passion can be found, like you said, in the process, if that's your attitude, right? It's like,
well, that's where all the joy is, right? Like the joy isn't the end point, right? The end point is what? You sold the company or you went public, right? Like there's plenty of founders I know that went public and are dealing with a lot more headaches of going public right now, right? And so they, in their head, they're like, we hit the goal, but like I'm still dealing with the same set of problems I deal with normally, just even bigger. And so that is it, right? And so I always attribute it to like anything you do outdoor, right? Because outdoor stuff kind of brings this out at a more small scale. So like hiking or climbing or doing anything really hard outdoors, right? And that's where it triggers this psychology, right? If you're summiting Mount Olympus, for example, it's a hard mountain to summit. And you're going to be questioning me like, man, my body hurts. Why am I doing this, right? And if your whole thing is just, I just want to get to the top, it's not enough for you to get to the top, right? Because it's just going to get steeper and harder, and you're going to get more and more tired to the point where you're like, it's not worth it. But if you're like enjoying the process of like, man, like, look how far I just come since that one thought I had about like how hard it is. And then you make it like these micro accomplishments, all of a sudden you'll just find yourself at the top and you'll be like, oh, dang, like here I am. And I actually enjoyed like this
I saw
journey.
these amazing flowers. I saw this crazy, mountain goat. I've seen stuff. It's the whole experience along the way, right?
And that's life. That's really like life, right? If your whole thing is just like the goal of, again, like being famous, being rich, having whatever, right? Anything, then it's like, then it's not going to happen actually, because your mind's already there in the future and you're not even enjoying or working through anything that's happening like now. And that's where all the magic is.
Even if you get it, it's not going to provide the feedback. You're not going to feel the way that you thought you were going to feel when you get to that point.
Because if that's the case, then anyone who's had an exit, why would they build another company? Right? And instead they're like, oh, I'm going to build,
I'm going to do something again.
I'm going to go build again, right? And that's the phase they love being in. They're like, this latter phase is like the boring part. It's this phase, like figuring it all out, having all the odds against you, like just thinking and iterating and working through things. And that to me is like, that's the best part to be in, because you're bringing in, like, to me, the way I think of it now is like an idea chose you and you're the individual that it chose to like try to bring this into reality. Let's see if you can do it.
So cool. Eric, you're awesome. This is so cool. It's been I mean, really kind of mind blowing, this whole conversation. And how do people find you? How do people, it's Credo.com, Krado?
Dot .co, Credo.co.
.co. Okay,
Yeah.
Credo.co.
Mm-hmm.
Can they just order the
Yep.
system right now? It's
Mhm.
ready to go. I can buy some for my plants right now.
We're getting caught up on our
Okay.
orders. So if you order now, you'll have a couple months delay. But yeah, we finally stabilized manufacturing and we're shipping.
Okay. So there'll be a few months delay if I ordered today. But I want to get some, see if my wife and I can actually become plant caretakers instead of killers, plant murderers. Where else can they find you? Like, where do you connect with people on social media? Like, where else
So
can
if
they
you
follow
want
your passionate movement?
So the only social media platform I'm active on is LinkedIn. You're always welcome to message me on there, and I always make time to talk to other people that want to create something and help give you any advice or guidance that I can offer. But if you really want to be involved, we have a meetup group called Utah Houseplant Enthusiasts. Please
Nice.
join.
Okay.
That one is part of this community effort that we're growing, and it's grown organically, actually really quickly. So yeah, we want to have more and more people involved, and to the point where I'm trying to create a self-sustaining community,
Yeah.
and I'm no longer needed, right? And you guys are all the ones growing
Nice.
and spreading these ideas and concepts
Where
to
do they
more
find
people.
the community? On meetup.com?
Yep. Mhm.
Okay. Oh, one thing I forgot to ask. Maybe I'd assumed, but just for clarification, the sensor is outdoor as well, so I can use it in the garden, or is it mainly indoor right now?
It's mainly indoor right now, but our
Okay.
outdoor model will be ready later this year.
Okay, so there will be one, so I can use it in the garden, outdoor plants.
And that's what's cool about our membership program is if the sensors they're just part of the subscription. So once we have the outdoor ones ready, you just let us know how many you want to swap out, and you don't pay anything to do that.
Cool. So cool. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.